Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Module 3 of the 2020 CSO Anchors Annual Training of the Asian Development Bank. My name is Francesco Tornieri. I'm a Principal Social Development Specialist, acting CSO focal point for one of our regional departments called the South Asia Department at the Asian Development Bank. Module 3 follows two modules conducted yesterday. Module number 1 on visions, reimagining civil society engagement in the new normal, where we have engaged with the senior management of the Asian Development Bank on their views on how the new normal will play out in terms of greater opportunities and challenges for CSE engagement. And that first module was followed by a second module on stories of change, where staff from the regional department were able to relate to the message of management and share modality through which they have enhanced or engaged with civil society in the past. So we show some results in the new normal and aspiration, but also commitment on how to engage further in what we hope will be soon to be called a post-COVID environment. With that, let me introduce the module 3, which is a module aimed at facilitating a dialogue between two selected CSO women leaders, as it happens. So facilitate a dialogue with CSOs and ADB staff on challenges and opportunity voiced by civil society experts. With me today, we got Rima Nanavati and Mislan Mercado. Rima is the Executive Director of the Self-Employed Women Association of India, better known as SEWA. The SEWA is the largest union in the informal sector workers, possibly globally, aim to provide full employment and self-reliance to its 1.7 million members. Let's hear this figure very clearly. It's a great outreach. So RIMA oversees over 4,800 self-help groups, cooperatives, economic federations, totally the 1.7 million members we discussed, pan-India, including 16 states, but also reaching out to, at least in South Asia, 700 countries. Mislan Mercado is currently the regional director of another very known civil society organization, in fact, non-government organization, operating actively in Asia called Oxfam. I think we all are familiar with this, the role played by Oxfam historically in spearheading innovative approaches to CSO engagement. Lan is an activist, development worker with over 30 years of experience working with civil society coalitions, environmental movements, international women's rights organizations, and since 1999, she's been with Oxfam, starting as a project officer and now leading different managerial roles till the current role as the focal point for Asia. With that brief introduction, and thanking very much the speakers to give really a further sense to this CSO anchor training. I think we're looking forward to hear from you, but also to be energized by your unstoppable experience, notwithstanding the circumstances, you're always in the forefront. So with that, I think I would like to basically very spontaneously introduce and ask Rima Nanavati to, if you could describe to us, just to keep on the energizer, what has driven you, Rima, motivated you, or led you to pursue a career in a civil society organization. Thank you very much. Over to you for a 3 minutes sort of brief introduction on that. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Francesco, Rosale, and ADB for inviting me. And I speak here today on behalf of our 1.9 million women workers. And to your question, I think two lessons I would like to state here, which has not only drawn me, but made me to continue work for over 3.5 decades with SEWA. And the first lesson is that poverty is also a form of violence with the consent of the society. And the second lesson that I have learned is that poor do not want charity or anything free or any doles. What they need is an enabling environment, partnerships that equip and enable in their fight against poverty. So as we all are, studying and pursuing our higher studies and looking for glamorous careers, we read about poverty, and I come and I live in a country which has world's largest number of poor still, unfortunately. And it's a completely different thing when you experience poverty yourself. So when you at Seva, I was asked to when I was doing my Indian Administrative Services, and during one of your exposures to a civil society organization, I was asked to go and live in a dry desert area where there was no water, no electricity, and I had to look at how do we organize women around water. This was a government's water supply program, and Seva was trying to organize women as water users. And I think that made me understand what are the barriers that make the women, amongst the poor women, more vulnerable. Understand the issues and needs of the women and the communities, and then how do you design a program around that? Because that is what then leads to mutual accountability, a sense of ownership and belongingness. You live amongst the communities, and therefore they don't see you as an outsider who has come, but they see you as one amongst themselves. And I think that is what drew me to Seva. It opened up my eyes that, when we are designing a water supply program, we just don't know that what it means to carry even one potload of water without even a drop dripping down. And then I will understand that, oh, what all do I need to take care when I'm designing a program? So that's how I started at Seva. I never went back to the government. And today I'm here with you all today sharing my experience organizing rural women across the country in 18 states and also in the neighboring countries of Afghanistan, Pakistan, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Bhutan as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the bringing us to the grassroots, and obviously, thank you very much for that. Handing it over to Lan to share her views and experience.
Thank you. And Francesco, thank you very much for actually, making this more of a spontaneous conversation. I think that's a much better approach to learning rather than, cut and dry presentations. So for me, I got involved with civil society organizations and civil society movements. Not immediately. My first job after leaving university was actually with the government. I was with the planning service of the then Ministry of Trade and Industry. But over the years, I've also worked in many other fields. I've worked as a journalist, I've worked with the private sector, I've also worked with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, as their advisor. So I've tried all sorts of ways, but I think no matter how you want to approach it, or at least me personally, no matter how I approach it, my eyes were always on how I could contribute to improving the lives of poor people. And there's also a personal reason to that. I'm the first college graduate in my family. And so I know how it is to live with less means compared to others and the importance of education. And what has always driven me was making sure that people had equal access to opportunities through which they could lift themselves out of poverty. But we all know that lifting people out of poverty is not just down to individual efforts, although that's important. There's really a system that we need to address that's creating problems, but at the same time has huge potential to create solutions to address not just deep levels of poverty, but inequality across many different kinds of societies.
Thank you very much. I think both of you have basically set a nice stage, and it comes of echo for ADB staff the clear focus of Strategy 2030 interpreted in many operations priority, but particularly operation priority number one about social inclusion and operational priority number two, because it's about the persisting gender inequalities. So thank you for sharing your personal experience and also, I think, emphasizing your connection somehow historically to governments and other networks. The kind of demystified sense of isolation of CSO from the possible and a good engagement with the government and regional networks. So on this line, and kind of deepening a little bit of discussion on the topic, my question to Rima is, I think we're very curious to understand, particularly from your perspective, what is the current situation of the advocacy service providers, CSOs, under COVID-19, their challenges and responses? We hear and read so much, Rima. Can you help us put some order in our frenzied ideas and access to all sorts of information? What's truly happening in the field?
Sure, thank you so much. And I think I really appreciate that you asked me to share what's the current situation on the ground. And I think, let me tell you that, a quick assessment which was done by SEVA only just recently showed that almost 73% of the women have lost all their means of work and livelihood. Almost 63% of the women now have very less food intake. And what is even more sad is that children of these informal sector women workers who had started going to schools, you see that 35% of them are now school dropouts, and majority of them are girls in the we also see that how women are forced to, live now on the streets because they are not able to pay either the rent or they cannot afford to pay the electricity bills. So all that is also affecting. But I would also like to reiterate here that loans as relief work only when the economy is functioning. But today the economy in countries like ours is fractured, and therefore the informal sector workers are thrown out of the economy. What is needed, therefore, I will come to that later, but let me also bring you to one of our grassroots leaders, Kapila Ben. She will narrate her own experience in her own words for 2 minutes in Gujarati, and I will translate for you all.
Thank you very much, Rima. And then I think we'd be interested to hear your perspective about how CSOs, advocacy, and service delivery NGO are adapting to the change. But absolutely welcoming the voice of Camila. Over to you.
Kapila Ben, તમે બોલશો હવે? Kapila Ben.
હેલો.
બોલો.
નમસ્તે રીમાબેન, બધાને નમસ્તે. મારું નામ કપિલાબેન છે. હું આણંદ જિલ્લાના રાસનોલ ગામમાંથી બોલું છું અને હું એક તમાકુ ખેત મજૂર બેન છું અને હું 21 વર્ષથી સેવા સાથે જોડાયેલી છું.
I'm Kapila Ben. I come from Rasnol village in Anand district. I'm currently also talking to you from my own village. I'm a tobacco processing unit worker and a small farmer also. And I've been a member of SEVA for 21 years now.
એટલે ખાસ મારો સંદેશો તો બેન આખા મારા જે 20 લાખ સભ્ય છે એમના વતી એટલો જ હું સંદેશો આપવા માંગુ છું કે જો અમારી શ્રમજીવી બહેનો મહેનતુ તો બહુ જ છે અને એમનું ભવિષ્યમાં જો અત્યારે તો એમના હાલમાં 15 દિવસનું એમને કામ મળતું હોય છે તો 15 દિવસના કામની અંદર એ લોકો એમનું જો ભરણ પોષણ કરી શકતા હોય તો જો એમને પૂરેપૂરા 30 દિવસની એમને રોજગારી 365 દિવસની જો મળતી હોય તો એ એમના ભવિષ્યમાં એમના જે કુટુંબનું ભરણ પોષણ છે તો એ સારી રીતે કરી શકે, એમના બાળકોની પણ સંભાળ એ લોકો સારી રીતે રાખી શકે.
પછી પેલું રેશન વાળું કહેજો. My message on behalf of my 1.9 million members to you all today is that current situation is that we only get work for 10 to 15 days in a month, and as a result we are not able to have 2 square meals. So what we want to seek is full employment for all the 30 days, so that we can feed our children, we can take care of their education and also feed the family.
બીજું ખાસ બેન કેવું છે કે સરકારની યોજનાઓ તો બધી ઘણી બધી આવતી હોય છે, પણ જ્યારે કોવિડ વખતે જ્યારે આપણે રેશનની જે રેશન ગામડામાં મળતું હોય તો એ રેશનની અંદર યોજનાઓ તો બહાર પાડી નાખે છે પણ સભ્ય સુધી પહોંચતી નહીં હોતી. પણ જ્યારે રેશનનું જ્યારે વહેંચવામાં આવ્યું ત્યારે અમે એવું થયું કે અમુક જગ્યાએ છે ને તે રેશન વેચી દેતા હતા ડાયરેક્ટલી, એ લોકો બીજા લોકોને વેચી દે પણ સભ્ય સુધી પહોંચતું નતું. પણ ખરેખર જ્યાં આગળ સેવાની બહેનો હાજર હતા તો એ રેશન વેચાવા પણ ના દીધું અને લોકો ખડે પગે ઉભા રહી અને કોવિડ વખતે આપણા સભ્યના એક સભ્યના ઘેર એ અનાજ અમને પૂરું પાડ્યું એમ.
The second message I would like to say is that wherever there are, women who are aware, who are able to take certain leadership role during the COVID-19 lockdown, the government had declared relief packages and ration was distributed through the public distribution system. But there are leakages. So in some of the villages, the ration was directly sold away by the shop owner. And I went from village to village in almost 6 to 7 villages and ensured that every woman got the due entitlement. And wherever she was not getting, I took all the women, went to the block officer, went to the district officer, and ensured that, whatever their due entitlements were, they were given, and the complaints were lodged against the ones who were doing all the fraud. So this is the kind of a role that one needs to play when you are a community organizer, a community leader. બસ હવે રહેવા દો પછી હા કહી દો જલ્દી.
એટલે એટલે ખાસ હું એટલું કહેવા માંગતી હતી કે ખરેખર જો જે પણ કામ હોય ને એ શ્રમજીવી બહેનોને ધ્યાનમાં રાખીને જો કરશે ને તો શ્રમજીવી બહેનોનું ભવિષ્ય ને એમના બાળકોનું ભવિષ્ય આગળ જતા પણ બહુ વધી જશે. કેમ કે આપણે બી સેવા એવું વિચારે છે કે ત્રીજી પેઢી ચોથી પેઢીનું ભવિષ્ય શું, તો હું ભવિષ્ય આ જ સમજુ છું બેન કે જો બહેનોને પૂરતી રોજગારી 365 દિવસની મળશે તો એમનું ભવિષ્ય એ લોકો આગળ જતા બહુ સરસ રીતે બનાવી શકશે.
So my final message to you all, that thank you so much for inviting me also to share my experience. But I would urge and request you all that when you are designing programs, keep women like me, rural grassroots women, urban poor women in the center, and design the programs so that we are able to also get opportunities of the development. Thank you. Francesco, do I have time, or I first
Thank you very
give to
much. Well,
Len?
it's sorry, it takes time to obviously digest. It is very touching, real message from the field. Anything that you can share with us in terms of the current situation? I mean, obviously we saw what you're dealing with, but what's the current situation of advocacy and service providers here? So we got a very strong hint. So if you can briefly elaborate on that before handing over to Len. Over to you, Rima.
Yeah, I think the current situation in terms of advocacy, in terms of civil society engagement, is that the space for civil society, as we all know, is shrinking day by day and week by week. And I think the focus has been more on the large corporations, on the large private sector entities. So how do you give moratorium to those entities? What kind of loans and what kind of relief measures, tax concessions are needed? But one also, in a country like India, in the South Asia, where 93% of the workforce is in the informal sector, we do need to look at what kind of measures are needed for these kind of workers to bounce back into the back into the workforce as a workforce. We see that migrant workers are still not returning back to the cities. It was so shameful that millions of migrant workers, without getting their due payments, with no savings in their pockets, had to walk hundreds of kilometers. That was a shame on a country and an economy like ours. And they are still not able to return back to work. So my major concern is that if we are talking about universal social protection, it universal social protection only works when there is basic income available, and basic income is available only when the livelihoods are stabilized. And when the livelihoods are not stabilized, neither do the informal sector workers, the grassroots workers, the rural workers, whatever terminology we want to use, they will not be able to get the due entitlements under universal social protection, whether it's healthcare, whether it's education, whether it's nutrition, whatever we want to say. And therefore, I think it is very appreciative that ADB is working on processes and practices to fulfill the SDG commitments. But I think ADB also needs to look at how do you design programs, how do you design new financial instruments that go beyond SMEs and MSMEs. We have to look at these kind of informal sector women workers like Kapila Ben, that, how can they stabilize? So there's a need to design a recovery and resilience fund to immediately stabilize the livelihoods of women workers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think, Rima, we hear you loud and clear in terms of the new areas of focus of Sewa, even in supporting, the new normal. Over to Lan for her views on this question.
Thanks. And I was listening to Rima as well as she speaks, and it reflects many of Oxfam's own insights into this situation. We don't really use the term new normal in Oxfam. We don't want to accept what's happening as normal and something that needs to continue. But we do see COVID-19 as an opportunity to disrupt existing systems as well as social relationships, because what we think COVID-19 has done, it's a public health emergency, obviously, but it's not one story. It's not just a health story. It has multiple dimensions, and in fact has deepened pre-existing economic and social inequalities. Obviously, its impact has been greater on poor people, and amongst poor people, women, who many of whom are in the informal sector that Rima had so eloquently talked about. But let's not forget that women are also, very much in the front lines of, provide service, the provision of health services. We also think that the impact of COVID will be long term, which is why we need to take this opportunity to reset. And that's why I like very much the title of the theme for this CSO training. I think part of your question, Francesco, is what's the situation for organizations like Oxfam ourselves, and how have we been affected, and how are we therefore adapting and responding to the situation? So certainly, because of the multiple dimensions of COVID, we've had to realign our priorities. And I think the opportunity was there also to make sure that we are pulling together and aligning both our advocacy priorities with our programmatic focus. And that makes our response to COVID-19 and the context within which COVID-19 is happening, if I may say so myself, more effectively. So our first focus is certainly, pushing for a people's vaccine, so that, COVID is also an opportunity for pandemic profiteering. And that's something that we shouldn't allow. We should make sure that there is equal access to the vaccine, because no one is safe until everyone is safe. So that's our number one priority. Secondly, resetting the economy so that we actually address those systemic factors that enable inequality and poverty to continue, including gender inequality. There's a big focus for us on gender relationships and resetting that. specifically addressing gender-based violence, which is a shadow pandemic that's happening alongside COVID-19. Addressing underpaid and unpaid care work, which obviously has multiplied, especially for women. Although we do see certain shifts in the distribution of labor, but there needs to be a lot more investment, public investment on measures that will redistribute and lighten the load of care work, but beginning with recognizing that without care work that mostly women do, no other work is possible. And making sure that we do support the spaces and the capacity for women leadership so that they can inform policies and programs. Finally, we cannot just focus on COVID-19 because, as you see in the Philippines, it's COVID-19 happens and then we have a series of typhoons. Climate change will not go away. So we need to be able to see how we can also effectively address crisis upon crisis. And it's not just natural disasters, it's also conflict. We have a very big program happening in Bangladesh and Myanmar to address the needs of the Rohingya refugees there. And we've had to integrate COVID-19 into our strategies. And that's also happening in many other places, in Yemen, for example, in South Sudan. We're also addressing that through the influx of refugees in Afghanistan, as well as in Pakistan. And finally, civic space. There are many governments who address COVID-19 very well by working with multiple stakeholders, and COVID-19, as well as all the other problems that happen alongside it, is a situation that cannot be addressed by just one actor. And that's why a whole of government and a whole of society approach is really critical. And yet, there are many places also where authoritarian measures have actually increased. And COVID-19 has become an opportunity for suppressing rather than supporting the role and value addition of civil society and the voices that they represent coming from communities. I also just want to briefly touch on financing for programs that civil society organizations are implementing. Certainly, COVID has also impacted on donor priorities, and we're seeing some good trends there. We've seen flexibilities from many institutional funding donors. Official ODA has been adapted to ensure that COVID-19 is integrated into the agenda as well as into the priorities, and the way that funding support is structured. But I'd like to highlight the fact that in the global humanitarian response, at least as of July, zero funding has been given to women's organizations to support the work that they do at the front lines of COVID-19, as well as the work that they have been doing to support women's empowerment. And I think that's something that we need to focus on and try to continue to change. But, internally also, our staff have not been immune. We have had staff who have been affected. In fact, I've had staff in Tajikistan whom we lost to COVID-19, and that's really unfortunate because, that's also coming from a slow recognition that there is a problem, and therefore, government systems have not been as quick as we would have hoped for. But we do know that COVID-19 is going to continue for quite a while. And so we need to make sure that we are adapting our strategies, our organizational structure, so that we are able to effectively address it, not just on our own, but also making sure that we continue to support our partners, grassroots partners most especially, because I think what's really important in this new situation is local action, because that's really where the front line is. I'll stop there, Francesco.
Thank you very much also for educating us on the words to use and not to use. You make us really reflect on the sort of overuse of the word "the new normal," which has become a sort of quite utilized word. So thank you, Lana. I'm thinking how to phrase the question to Rima. Rima, before we move on into the next question, I think Oxfam was able to really give us a strong feedback on how advocacy and public functions of the Oxfam family have been adapted or are trying to be adapted to the new situations, not to call it the new normal. And the emphasis, obviously, to support grassroots initiative and collaborative practices. Would you like to add something to that, or just sorry, I just don't want to push you to reply, but it's interesting for us to understand how the functioning of large organizations like yours have been affected and are thinking, to the extent you can share, to adapt to the current circumstances, keeping in mind its focus at the grassroots level. So over to you for a couple of minutes, if you don't mind.
Definitely, I wanted to, but I am mindful of the time. You had warned me to stick to the time limit. So thank you for giving this opportunity. And I will speak, and I'll also bring in our grassroots leader also to share how they had to change and adapt to the situation as well. And I think with the lockdown that came in, and now with the unlocking, so that the economy can again start functioning and hopefully come back to normal. I think the biggest was that these social distancing, lockdown, all these are very alien concepts for the poor and the rural workers themselves. If you are living in a very small, tiny room in an urban slum, how with a family of 8 members or 11 members, how do you keep social distancing? How do you have confined to that little room for 24 hours and 30 days in a month? So therefore, and then there was so much of anxiety, there was so much of tension because the work had suddenly come to a grinding halt, whether I was a farm laborer or I was a vegetable vendor or I was a waste collector. And how do I feed my family now? So therefore, in order to reduce the violence on the women, we always have experienced, be it in the earthquake or be it in the cyclone or be it in the riots, that work is the biggest healer. So our major challenge and the way we had to adapt was how to start giving work immediately to your members when they are confined to their homes. So we immediately asked them to start making masks, and today these women make hundreds of thousands of masks which are used by the government, medical frontline workers, by the hospitals, by the private companies. They make PPE suits. We also had to ask them to start making paper bags and envelopes because India has to be a plastic free nation. And that's how women started bringing in direct cash income into the families. And that is what was the biggest healer. That reduced the abuse and violence on women. How do you keep children engaged? They were all out of school and they were at home, so we had to immediately start programs for children. That and the best way of spreading the message of social distancing, of hygiene, of the precautions was that you involve children in designing posters, in making stories, in scripts. So we had a cadre of 27,000 children who worked for 3 full months on spreading the COVID messages. And once the children take on those messages, they'll ensure that their families also do it. The biggest change was fast tracking on the digital front. How do you keep in touch with your grassroots members like Kapila Ben, which are spread across the country? And right from the second day of the lockdown, we had to make ensure that these women start using the different applications. You cannot be sitting and saying that sorry, we cannot now function because everything has come to a grinding halt. So I think the biggest lesson here is that if you are a community-based organization, if you are a CSO, you do not wait for some funder to come and give you funds. but you adapt based on what the situation and what the need of the community is, of your members is. So we now have telemedicine centers. So we are directly in touch with not only the COVID patients, but even for other illnesses that the community have. We have a children's program going on. I would now bring in Kapila Ben to talk about how decentralized supply chains work much, much better in continuing work and livelihoods than large national and global supply chains.
Thank
Kapila Ben,
you.
તમે રૂઢીની વાત કરશો કપિલા Ben?
હા બેન,
હા.
એટલે ખાસ કેવું છે કે જયારે કોવિડ વખતે કશું બહેનોના ભરણ પોષણમાં કશું જ બી નતું રહ્યું, અને તે વખતે અમે પણ એક સંગઠન તરીકે એની તાકાત લઈને બહેનોની પાસે અમે પણ જતા હતા, કેમ કે એમને જરૂરી એવું હતું કે એમને મળવું અમારા માટે બહુ અગત્યનું હતું. પણ પછી જોયું બહેનોના ઘરે જઈને જોયું તો એમની પાસે ખાવાનું જ બિલકુલ નતું રહ્યું. ત્યારે એકદમ આમ આઘાત જેવું લાગ્યું કે બહેનો માટે અમે શું કરીએ એમ. પણ ત્યારે મને ખબર પડી કે અમારી પોતાની કંપની છે અને એ રૂઢી કંપની છે. એ જે ખેડૂતો ઉત્પાદન કરે છે એ જ અમે લાવીને અમારા બહેનો સુધી અમે પહોંચાડતા હોય છે. અને ત્યારે અમે ભેગા થઈ અને અમે એક વખત કલેક્ટરની સાથે લખાણ લાયા, અને ત્યાંથી લખાણ લઈ અને અમે અમારા જ્યાં જ્યાં સંગઠનના જે ગામો હતા અને જ્યાં બહેનો અમારા હતા ત્યાં અમે પૂરતું એમના કુટુંબનો પોષક આહાર અમે પૂરો પાડ્યો. પણ એટલું તો અમે જોયું કે ખરેખર આવી પરિસ્થિતિમાં પણ અમારી કંપનીનો જે સામાન હતો, કેમ કે અમે બીજું બધું તો નથી રાખતા, પણ જે બહેનોના કાયમી રોજિંદુ વપરાશ વાળી વસ્તુ હતી, તો એ સમયે બહેનોને આ કામમાં બહુ લાગ્યું. અને ખાસ હું રૂઢીની કંપનીનો પણ આભાર માનું છું કે આવા સમયે બહેનોને જયારે ખાવાનું નથી મળતું હતું ત્યારે અમારી કંપનીએ એમાં બહુ જ મદદ કરી છે. કેમ કે એ પણ એક શ્રમજીવી બહેનોની કંપની છે, એટલે એ તો એનું દુઃખ સમજી જ શકે કે બહેનોના માટે પોષક આહાર એમના કુટુંબનું કેટલું અગત્યનું છે. એટલે કોવિડ વખતે પણ અમે
એક
અમે જે અમારું
ભાષાંતર કર્યું. I
હા
wanted to share my own experience that, how as a community organizer, as a community leader, I think the biggest was that you meet your members, because how do they share otherwise? And that is what was the biggest thing, that I went from house to house, met with the members, so they were able to share their difficulties, their concerns, and the biggest message that was coming out was that there was no food in the houses. And we have our own agribusiness company called Ruby, and that was the peak agriculture season. The transportation had closed down, the markets had closed down. And so I immediately called up the CEO of the company and I told that let us start procuring from these local farmers. So we started procuring from the local farmers, processed it, packaged it in the villages itself. And we went to the district collector, got the permission from him, and we got the passes and we distributed food ration kits to every household. So I want to say that, if you have your own company, which is owned by the farmers themselves, then you are able to adapt. So the locals, we set up our own local procurement and distribution network. And that's how we covered 500,000 households. And not a single household went without food. So I'm so very grateful to our own company as well. So therefore, I
અને
think
બીજું
the Hamul.
હા, બીજું ખાસ કેવું હતું કે બેન તે વખતે એવું પણ હતું કે ગામમાં દુકાનો વાળા પણ આપણા બહેનોને કશું આપતા નતા અને ઉધાર તો બિલકુલ આપતા નતા, કેમ કે એમની પાસે પણ સામાન એવો હતો છતાં બી આપણા સભ્યને નતા આપતા. દુકાનો વાળા બી બંધ કરી દેતા હતા અને સમય બી એવો હતો કે સવારમાં 7 થી 12 વાગ્યા સુધી દુકાનો ખુલ્લી હોતી હતી. એવામાં તો આપણા સભ્ય ઘરે હોય ને, કેમ કે એમને રોજગારી બહુ મહત્વની હતી તે વખતે. અને કાંઈ કઈને રોજગારી મળે તો એમના ઘરમાં ખાવાનું ના મળે. એટલે આવી કન્ડિશનમાં પણ અત્યારે અમને ગર્વ થાય છે કે જે કંપનીના માલિક અમે એક શ્રમજીવી બહેનો છે કે પોતે ઉત્પાદક છે અને પોતે માલિક છે અને એના મેનેજર પોતે છે, તો આવા સમયે પણ બહેનોને ભરણ પોષણ પૂરતું પોષક આહાર મેળવી આપ્યો.
I'm very proud, therefore, to share with you that this is a company where we, women like me, are the owners and managers of the company, and therefore we were able to repurpose the whole supply chain. Because at such times, even the local shop owners were not able to procure things; they were not willing to give on credit. The second thing I want to add here was that women like me now have smartphones, we have tablets, and we now use all digital applications. How do we get our cash benefit, which was given by the government from the banks? So now I have mobile wallets, and I then, is able to deposit money and able to withdraw money. So these are the kinds of changes, and I'm very proud to say that even though we are rural, we are poor and illiterate, we are able to. So I think if ADB wants to partner with organizations that work directly with the community or with the grassroots base and work on gender inclusion, then I think organizations like SEVA are the ones that ADB needs to look at and work out instruments through which ADB can partner. Just last 1 minute, and I want to say what Lan was also referring, that the bank also needs to have a broader approach and urge the governments and the investors to offer a whole set of financial services, a combination of banking, savings, money transfers, loan, insurance, and pensions. We would also include, say, micro social impact funds and green investment facilities. Such combined products would cater to various life cycle needs of the women like Kapila Ben, which are into millions in South Asia. Cope with and build their resilience to repeated disasters. I will stop here.
Thank you very much. And because indirectly we're getting few questions, and I think you were already able to address them without even having listened to the questions. So that's great progress toward the remaining 15 minutes. So handing over to Lan. Lan, we heard about some initial stages of recommendation for ADB to consider. I don't know the composition of the audience today, but I can reassure you that I will share these very strong messages from you both on the informal sector as one of the area that requires further attention from the organization. There's lots of goodwill, and we share with the thematic groups. So that's where we organize it these days for gender equality, but also for social development, if not beyond. So thank you for this very clear and consistent message. So Tulan, if you could help us out a bit, working with the ADB, challenges and opportunities. How do you see this evolving under the current pandemic context, and hopefully under what I call the post-COVID-19 forthcoming scenario, hopefully? So over to you.
Yes, thank you. Well, we understand that ADB is a bank, and so, we can certainly accept certain requirements of the ADB that comes with its projects, given its nature. But COVID-19 is really an opportunity for positive disruption, creative disruption. And I think there are plenty of opportunities to find ways to adapt systems, procedures, instruments that will be much more adapted to the nature and the value addition and the role of civil society organizations in any program, in any project. So I think the opportunities really lie in making civil society organizations a key ally for the ADB and bringing together the strengths of the ADB in terms of its technical expertise, but also the expertise that belongs to civil society organizations and which comes from grassroots rootedness and the voices that they bring to the table. There's also a huge opportunity to invest in women's leadership. So targeting and channeling adequate funding to support the agency and power of women's organizations, and maybe also to strengthen the criteria for gender when you evaluate projects, or when you speak with governments, because I think an opportunity here is for the ADB to step up and use its influence and its powerful voice, and also giving inputs to the government when they design their own policies and measures. I think there's also certainly, an opportunity in improving the partnership principles, building on lessons from the past. Don't drop that, because that's a huge asset that we can build on. In terms of designing programs, as I said earlier, COVID responses are becoming even more localized. But that's also where a lot of tension is coming from. And that's where a lot of not just human rights activists or environment activists, it's also health workers who are being threatened. So there's also an opportunity to make and protect the space for civil society participation, especially in ADB's own interventions.
Now, on this one, I'm sure you engage with lots of youth in
Yes.
your engagement. Can you just give us your views, or possibly even a motivational message in this kind of environment, how to motivate the youth to just really relate to the amazing mandate, complementary mandate of civil society organization in achieving these overarching goals? Any views on that?
Well, definitely young people who are organizing themselves now, whether it's in response to COVID-19 or a whole gamut of other issues, do their work very differently from old fogies like me. So the first thing to do with youth movements or youth organizations is to recognize the specificity of their approaches, and to adapt to them. But what we've definitely seen is how well they use technology, how flexible they are when they organize themselves, and how very good they are with blending different issues. So to them, they see issues as very much as interdependent. And there are many women, young leaders who use the digital space and digital technology for advocacy, for setting up platforms that bring different people together, but also for taking forward their own agenda and their own analysis and their own strategy for addressing these issues. And they often operate with no limits to political or geographic boundaries. So we need to be a lot more, borrowing from Hong Kong and now Thailand, we need to be a lot more like water, which is to flow with how situations unfold and how quickly, how rapidly they're able to respond to this. In Oxfam, we've actually set up a separate unit just to make sure that we do focus and listen to the voices of young people. And I think for bringing it back to the ADB, I mean, your documents, the Strategy 2030 and the CSO engagement are already very strong in terms of, your commitments. But I think what might help is if there are concrete mechanisms coupled with specific resources set aside to create that space and to support the capacity of young people, indigenous communities, urban poor communities, the informal sector. And developing these enabling mechanisms for broader and faster and more adaptive collaboration. I think that's really where the most important opportunities are, Francesco.
Thank you very much. It reminds me, at least, that in the context of South Asia, we are engaging in a consultative process, and we're asking the STTC, which is our central department, to collaborate on that, to really reach out and hear the voices of marginalized and vulnerable groups, including, old age, disability, and other forms of social exclusion. So thanks very much to remind us we want to be agile, and thank you very much also for reminding the importance of listening to the youth. I just wanted to ask, because the questions that are coming up will be the final one, and so I can give it a headway to think, Lan, by asking then Rima to come back. But the question that is coming to the fore is if you could think about a couple of successful practices, collaborative practices, that you've experienced in your professional life in dealing with multilateral development banks. But before you answer that, going back to Rima, whether she wants, in a couple of minutes, to give us also her views on the need to constantly engage, as we see it, from the youth in the future of civil society organization. If you have any feedback to us just to motivate a little bit the audience on this area that has emerged in the Q&A. Thanks, and then you may also answer to the question of the good collaborative practice, but maybe after Lan. Over to you, Rima.
Thank you. I think definitely because at SEVA we are seeing that 40% of our members are young women who are becoming the members of SEVA. And COVID has also opened up several new opportunities as well for the youth of the country. First and the foremost is that one has to now think of how do I move from a wage laborer to becoming an entrepreneur. And I think that's where, banks like ADB need to come in, that how do you accelerate entrepreneurship, enterprises building. We in this past 6 months only have seen that thousands of new enterprises came up from these young women and young boys in the villages. To give some examples, you have vegetable growers and you have vegetable vendors. And we use digital technology to connect them and then create a platform so that they can continuously be in touch with the customers. So now they use electric rickshaws and the vendors have now become delivery agents. So it's a more dignified work for the youth as well. And we now have a whole vegetable enterprise. So from the farm directly to the customer. Similarly, we have a mobility enterprise because transportation has become a big issue. And so we partnered with some of the automobile companies, and the young boys and girls were trained as drivers and as conductors, and now they ferry school children, they ferry traders and also other passengers. So we have 100 such transportation enterprises. Renewable energy is another area where you can set up your own farm top enterprises, village level enterprises. So I think if you look at what is going to be the future of workers, and therefore SEVA is working on setting up a global coalition on future of workers, that what's going to be the future of workers. And that is where I think one has to look at skills, productive assets, recovery funds, startup funds, stabilization funds. And these are the kinds of things that the younger people are very much agile and very much adaptable, and they adopt and use it to their benefit as well. So I think there are some optimism left for the youth as well, and they can really bring these older generation into the fold as well. So
Thank you very much.
in 4
Thank you,
months,
Imogen.
our enterprises are now providing work to 50,000 young people as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much. So we got 4 minutes left, and I think I was able to filter the questions to the best of my ability. So over to Lan with his final question, which is about if you can share the successful collaborative practices that you have experienced as a way for us to reflect on the way forward. Then a couple of minutes and a couple of minutes to Rima to conclude on this last question. Over to you, Lan.
Well, I'd like to begin by, giving credit to the NGO and civil society center of the ADB and sustaining exchanges with not just with Oxfam, but with many other civil society organizations. And I think through that and other efforts parallel to that, we have been in very productive conversations on gender with your specialists. This includes addressing the issue of women's unpaid care work. I've also heard very recently, positive feedback on interactions with civil society organizations, including Oxfam on climate and energy, whereas, this has been marked with adversarial relationships previously. But focusing on a particular project, I think I'd also like to cite the Urban Climate Change Resilience Trust Fund, which supports a number of pilot and project development efforts that we're doing. In the Philippines, I think we're working on 4 peri-urban sites. And I think the success that I'd like to highlight here is by combining our strengths, the ADB's and civil society's strengths, we have been able to identify with the communities the key drivers for their vulnerability, and more importantly, designed resilience solutions such as community managed water systems, waste recovery, flood drainage improvement. So these platforms brought communities together with government, with the ADB, with the private sector, and strengthened community ownership by enabling them to influence investment decisions. So this bottom-up, inclusive, empowering, and innovative approach needs to grow from strength to strength. We need to tap into these success stories, small as they are maybe for now, and that needs to be, if you want to look for a new normal, that needs to be the new normal.
Thank you very much. And Lan, before handing over to Lima, because we want to stick to the time, thank you very, very much for you and Oxfam constant outreach to the Asian Development Bank. We are
constantly
very
bugging you mean?
No, it's okay. It's all positive, good news, and it's food for thought. So thank you very much. So handing over to Rima for her final feedback on this question, and then over to Roselle from the NGO Center at the center. Over to you, Rima, for a couple of minutes.
Sure, thank you. I think, talking about successful partnerships, we partnered with the International Fund for Agriculture Development after the earthquake of 2001 in Gujarat. And, the results that came out, the World Bank and the government of India took up that approach and designed the entire National Rural Livelihoods Mission. Likewise, we are partnering with FAO. We are also partnering with the World Bank on a large digital financial inclusion program, which has become so very relevant in the current context. So how do you partner with the public sector banks, with the financial institutions, and the grassroots communities? You have your business correspondents, your banking correspondents, and that's how you think about financial inclusion and digital inclusion. So I think similarly, we are partnering with the Food and Agriculture Organization on working on how do you turn your every farm into an enterprise and integrate renewable energy and technology. So I think there are multiple such success stories. So ADB also needs to take some bold steps and open up and look at how can it partner with civil society organizations like SEVA, which has a direct connection with the last mile, where you can see the results and the outputs. But I would say it's a partnership. It cannot be on a project cycle mode alone. Thank you so much. And I really appreciate giving me, but not only me, but Kapila Ben and million plus grassroots women the platform to share their experiences and voices. I thank you immensely, Francesco.
Indeed, thanks to you, Rima, and thanks to Kapila Bin as well. I wanted to thank over to the NGO Center, namely Roselle, which will lead us to the next session. Thank you very much for an inspiring session. Over.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Francesco, for very ably moderating our discussion today. And thank you to our panelists, Lan, Ricardo, and Rima Nanavati. Some points that we received from our session today, some advice, be agile, listen to the youth, take COVID as an opportunity for positive disruption. Our ADB Strategy 2030 strongly states support for civil society engagement already, and even some of our practices, but the suggestion is for us to further review, improve our processes and systems to further promote civil society engagement and provide resources for this. Thank you very much. Thank you also to our colleagues in ADB for joining our webinar today. And please don't forget to click the link to our evaluation survey in the chat box. Your feedback is important to us. For the CSO anchors who are enrolled for our full 3-day training, please don't leave yet. Please stay online. We will continue to be online. We'll just have a 5-minute break. Coming up next is our Module 4, Learning Exchange on Special Topics on Civil Society Engagement. Make sure you have indicated your name, indicate in your name, Zoom name, the breakout sessions you'd like to join. Session 1, youth involvement in civil society engagement. Session 2, documenting civil society engagement in our project documents. And Session 3, M&E, monitoring and evaluation with civil society, youth, and citizens groups. Thank you very much again. See you after 5 minutes.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Is everybody back to the plenary? How did your sessions go? Perhaps we can ask one volunteer from each group to share their learning points from their sessions. In this session,
Yep, I think Rose is going to present from PHCO.
Okay, hi. Hi, this is Rose from PHCO. And for our group, for our session, so Lainey showed us um, basically how we can improve on our civil society engagement by through um, to the project documents that we come up with, like IPSA, SPRSS. Basically, what happened during the session was Lainey showed us good and uh, uh, not so good examples of how these project documents are prepared, and how ADB can improve and be more involved in making sure that we are in a better engagement, in a deeper, more meaningful engagement with CSOs and NGOs. So through the exercise, what we did was to check how these documents are being prepared, and and we went through how it should be better, it should be improved, so that we do not go through these documents just so because we want to tick off these requirements, but really for us to internalize that really this is part of our work, that we should have more meaningful engagement with stakeholders such as CSOs and NGOs. So that was a very meaningful, that was a very enlightening session, especially for myself, because I'm not part of project teams. I'm with the communications group in ADB. So for myself, it was an eye opener, because now I also know where to look for in case I want to see where we want to where our colleagues from the project operations, where they specify their CSO and NGO engagement. So yeah, it was we had a very good discussion also on how to improve those processes.
okay, great. Thank you, Rose. So it's just not civil society engagement is not just a tick the box exercise, but integral to our work. Uh, Great. So how about we hear from Group One, from the Youth for Asia group? Joaquim is here, I think. Joaquim,
Hi,
your key
everyone. Good afternoon.
highlights, summary from your session.
Sure. I basically did a crash course on what the Youth for Asia initiative does, and we had a brief discussion on what are the areas and opportunities that the attendees see in terms of engaging with young people in projects in the future. Some of the key highlights that we had were a potential opportunity for young people to further engage in TVET-related projects, doing a particular youth mapping activity that's country specific, given that there is different youth groups and youth sectors within each country. And we actually had good example of some from one of the attendees of their engagement with young people. And so how do we find more opportunities for us to replicate those intergenerational conversations, and not just see this as more so a once in a blue moon kind of activity. But one of the highlights we also brought up was the fact that Youth for Asia is a service that is available for ADB, especially for resident missions and CSO anchors that are looking to engage with young people. We are here to bounce ideas, but also co-design and work on future initiatives. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Akeem. So YFA is a service available to ADB, and they're really trying to. Uh, they have very strong work in terms of intergenerational conversations, promoting that. How about from Group Three? Lizelle, I think, can give her key takeaways from the M&E session with civil society and youth. Lizelle.
Yes. Thank you, Roselle. So for our session, my three main takeaways are first, on how CSO engagement is being implemented at the level two of the CRF, and there's actually some indicators on how to measure civil society engagement, which is aligned with how ADB defines participation. The second takeaway is that there are ways this is in terms of actually doing M&E or research. There are ways on how we could quantify certain items or certain indicators with basing on the standards from qualitative indicators, and we could see that as presented an example through the CAP score survey that was presented. And the third insight is on how the theory of change, which could be used as a useful tool for innovation in terms of project design and as a way to collaborate with various people on how to come up with outcomes and assumptions in order to base our projects. So
Great.
those are the three things that my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you, Lizelle. So, qualitative indicators can be translated into quantitative form so that it's easy to track, especially when we say meaningful CSE. How do we quantify that? So, those tools presented in session three were really very helpful. Okay, great. Just like yesterday, we also asked our creatives team, Des and her team in Tofu Creatives, to pick up highlights of our session for today and translate it into graphic form so that it's easier for us to understand, no? And pick up the key highlights for our session today. So I'll turn it over to Des to show their highlights for today's session.
Okay,
Des?
thanks everyone. Hi, so today is a continuation of this bridge building metaphor. So we started with this great reset, exploring challenges and opportunity of CSE, and hearing from civil society organizations, Oxfam and SEWA. So key insights that we got from there is that for Oxfam is that we don't use the term new normal, and they do recognize the long-term impacts of this. They don't want to normalize what's happening, but they do want to push for people's vaccine and resetting the economy. And as for opportunities, it is, to lessen the shrinking of democratic spaces, looking for ways to support grassroots because local action is where the fight is. And we are looking for opportunities for positive and creative disruption, which I think a lot of young people have a role to play, which also goes into our breakout groups earlier. And there's also this push for investment in the leadership of women, and how there were a lot of, we really have to rely on helping each other. and how these communities are able to do that in terms of crisis. So there was also a reference to be like water and going with the flow in this situation. And from Rima, we got that there are a lot of women who lost jobs, living in streets, and how it's becoming difficult to afford meals. And she said that loans only work if the economy is healthy, and some of the ways where families have coped were making masks, paper bags, which has, produced cash for families, having telemedicine centers, having mobile wallets for community members, and being able to adapt and evolve to the situation. And something striking from Kapila Ben Rasnol was that when designing these programs, think of the situation of women like me. And so to go through the three main groups today, YFA, of course, talked about their approach with insight, action, and voice. And it was an open um, platform on asking about youth participation and leadership, what kind of involvement, what kind of outputs, how do we mobilize, and what approach do we use. And that YFA is a service that they are offering. And for the peer learning exercise, there are these four major changes to look out for: the IPSA, the Summary Poverty Reduction and Social Strategy, Participation Plan, and Project Completion Report, and how this has been an integral part of the work, and how the session was useful for knowing where to look. And then for monitoring and evaluation, um, we have different ways of measuring, so civil society engagement, information generation and sharing, consultation, collaboration, partnership. And Adam also shared his experiences on behavior change journey with a CAP score in Nepal, and essentially how the inclusion of young people really has brought such a strong intergenerational collaboration, which has been useful for so many programs. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, great. Thank you, Des. Thank you very much for capturing